I have concluded a very fragile truce with Sigismund, and if anyone should disrupt my plans with headstrong acts of violence, there will be consequences.
With Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 around the corner, now is a great time for a second or first time playthrough of the original. Last time I played through the game was on the PlayStation 4 many years ago, and because of this exciting occasion, I decided to begin a new playthrough, and oh my god, does this game look fantastic. But I wanted to take this opportunity and benchmark the game across multiple GPUs and CPUs that I own. From the last generation, we have the Radeon RX 6800 XT and RTX 3080 Ti on an AM4 build with a 12-core Ryzen 5900X CPU. And from the current generation still, we have the RX 7900 XTX and RTX 4090 on an AM5 8-core Ryzen 9800X 3D. The focus will be 4K maximum settings. So let's dive in, and if you do end up liking the video, please give me a like. Let's begin with the RX 6800 XT. Because this game is a little bit older, we're going to focus on 4K here, maximum settings, and see how it goes. We're going to start with the 6800 XT. Like I said, and as you can see, we've maxed out all the graphical settings, including vegetation draw distance, LOD distance, and all that stuff. And as you can see, the game looks absolutely phenomenal. And the 6800 XT is actually doing pretty good here. Now we're outside of Rate. It's one of the early cities. It's a pretty big city actually, and it's going to be very exciting because the game is very CPU demanding. Actually, I didn't really know that because I haven't really looked at the game that thoroughly yet, so this is kind of the first time. But yeah, I mean, the outside, the countryside, the 6800 XT does fairly well in this big open area. Now, once you get closer to the forest area, though, the game does become a little bit more demanding. Whereas we were hitting around 70 or so FPS out in the open area, now that we're surrounded by a lot of trees and shrubs and all that, we have dropped a little bit below 60. We did get a couple hitches here and there, but for the most part, it was okay. Now here's where things get a little bit exciting. So I decided to check out Rate, the main city. Now I know that this area can be a bit CPU demanding, but I didn't realize by how much. So we're on the Ryzen 5900X right now. And as you can see here, we've become CPU bound. And you know, dropping into the mid 50s, it's not so bad. But what's kind of jarring is the frame times. If you're looking at them, they're quite erratic, and our 1% lows have dipped into the low 30s, which isn't great. The game does not feel particularly smooth. Now, I am benchmarking the game for the first time really in this way because I was playing it earlier on my Ryzen 9800 XD, and while I could tell that the city was more demanding, I didn't realize by how much. And look at, we drop into the low mid 40s. This particular area here. So Rate is a pretty big city, so I guess that kind of makes sense. Now, fix I found to work is to set a frame rate cap. Well, this will save you from the frame time issues as long as that cap isn't above what your CPU is capable of. So we know that we are dropping a bit below 50, but for the most part we are able to maintain around 50. So I set a 50 FPS frame rate cap. Now, yes, we can't get any more frames, but we can at least get a smoother frame delivery. And it definitely feels a little bit smoother, but wow, man, this game is very CPU demanding. Now, I'm interested to know how this game runs on Intel CPUs, because when this game came out, Ryzen wasn't really in the picture all that much. And chances are that maybe it's better optimized for Intel and these frame time issues don't happen in a CPU bound scenario. I'm not really entirely sure, but we're soon going to see how the game behaves on the 9800X 3D. But setting a frame rate cap in this big city, it did work for us. Our frame times are smoother. So yeah, that was quite interesting to see. But what about the RTX 3080 Ti? Let's take a look at that with the Ryzen 5900X as well. And the settings are going to be exactly the same. We have HD textures on, everything maxed out, including distance. And by the looks of it, the 3080 Ti seems to be quite a bit faster than the 6800 XT in this game, which I'm not really all that surprised about because this was, I believe, an NVIDIA sponsored title. It does actually support NVIDIA Ansel if you want to take photos with a photo mode. It's actually pretty cool. It's how you can take those nice panning shots and even add screen space ray trace global illumination for photo mode, which is pretty interesting. It's like a driver thing. But yeah, with the 1600 XT, we're around 65 FPS. And with the 3080 Ti, we're at around 80 or so in this big open area. And if we drop down by the forest area, which was a bit heavier on the 6800 XT, we ended up dropping to a bit below 60. We're around 55 FPS or so. 3080 Ti seems to be a little bit higher, around 65 to 70. So yeah, the 3080 Ti definitely a bit more powerful GPU in this game. I mean, it generally is, but it seems a bit more so in this game. But what about Radeon? Because are we still going to get those frame time issues in Radeon with the 3080 Ti? My guess is yes. Let's take a look at it. And as soon as we approach the city, we begin to get these frame time issues with the 1% lows dropping into the low to mid 30s. And the frame rate is more or less the same as the 6800 XT because we're CPU bound and we're using the same CPU. And if you pay close attention, we're using around 25% of the Ryzen 5900X and we're CPU bound. Now, at first I thought that maybe it had something to do with the dual CCD architecture of the Ryzen 5900X, but I did end up disabling one of the CCDs, and if you'll look, we're now using 43% of the Ryzen 5900X because we're not running dual CCD anymore. I wanted to try that, but it seems to be the same. The frame rate is still quite erratic, and we're around 60, dropping into the 50s and even the mid 40s as we make our way down the market. So that wasn't it. I thought that it was worth a shot. It was worth checking it out, but yeah. Not much changes. It's more or less the same. Okay then, so let's fast forward into the current generation and jump on the RX 7900 XTX with the Ryzen 9800X 3D. Alright, so we've now jumped onto my AM5 PC with the Ryzen 9800X 3D and RX 7900 XTX. As you can see, we're running the same exact settings, 4K, maxed out settings, maxed out distance, everything blasted to the top. And as you can see, we're getting way more FPS than we were before, which is no surprise really. On the 6800 XT, we're getting around 65 to 70 FPS. On the 3080 Ti, around 80 FPS. And on the 7900 XTX, we're at around 110 to 120 FPS, which is great because I'm playing on a 120 Hz 4K OLED TV, and the game looks absolutely fantastic. Although realistically, I would probably lock it to 120 so I don't get any screen tearing. But yeah, fantastic gameplay experience with the 7900 XTX. Now getting closer to the forest area as before, we do drop into the, I don't know, 90 to 100 FPS. Still really good, but yeah, some of the areas will be a little bit more graphically demanding. And all these outdoor areas, even with the Ryzen 5900X and the previous GPUs, we were GPU bound. It's only the city that becomes CPU bound. So speaking of which, let's take a look at Radeon on the 7900 XTX and Ryzen 9800X 3D. Okay, so we've now entered Radeon, and as you can see, our frame time is still a little bit erratic, although it's much better than it was before. We're getting a lot more overall FPS. We're at around 190 to 100 FPS. 1% lows previously on the 5900X were around the low 30s, sometimes even dropping a bit below. With the 9800X 3D, we're at around 50 for 1% lows and close to 100 FPS. So yeah, I mean, the 9800X 3D is a massive difference. Here, we were dropping into the 40s on the 5900X. And with the 9800X 3D, we do get pretty close to 60 there for a second. But the game does feel a little bit smoother. Again, if we were to lock our frame rate to 60 FPS, which is what I would probably do in the city, it would be perfectly smooth. Just kind of weird. I mean, games tend to usually get worse frame pacing if you run them CPU bound. Not all games, but some games it happens. I would say this one is probably the worst one that I've seen, where the frame time really becomes erratic when you're CPU bound for whatever reason. But anyway, let's take a look at our last GPU, the RTX 4090 with a Ryzen 9800X 3D. And again, we're running the same settings, 4K maximum settings. Now, it looks like the 4090 is a bit faster than the 7900 XTX. We're getting around 120 previously on the XTX, and with the 4090, we're at around 140 FPS. So not a massive difference. Realistically, I would be locking it at 120 on my display anyway, but it's just kind of interesting that the 7900 XTX actually does a lot better than the 6800 XT did versus the 3080 Ti. So those architectural differences have made a bit of a difference with the RDNA 3 GPUs. I'm very excited to see what RDNA 4 looks like. But yeah, open area, the 4090 crushes it. What about the forest? Also, the forest area here, we're actually fairly close to the 7900 XTX. We're only ahead by 10 to 15 FPS or so, right around there. But yeah, both GPUs crush it here. It looks like the game looks so good. I want to keep playing this game. I don't know if I'll be able to beat it though before the sequel comes out. I'm gonna try. This game is a timeless classic, and I can't believe I haven't played through it since I played it on the PlayStation 4, because it looks really, really good. But what about Radeon? Let's take a look at Radeon. Probably gonna get the same type of behavior there as well. Okay, so here's something that blew my mind away. We're on the 4090 Ryzen 5900X in Radeon. We're CPU bound, as you can clearly see, and we're getting more FPS than we were on the 7900 XTX. It's almost like the 7900 XTX has a higher overhead in this game. That is something I did not expect to see. If you recall, on the 7900 XTX, we dropped into the 70s FPS. As a matter of fact, let's put it side by side and compare, because I couldn't believe it. All right, so check this out, guys. We have the 7900 XTX on the left with a Ryzen 9800X 3D, and 4090 on the right with the same CPU, same PC. And you can clearly see how much ahead the 4090 is, and you can tell that we're CPU bound on both. GPU use is dropping well below 99%. I almost can't believe this. I've never seen this in any other game. Normally, there's a bit of a more of an overhead on NVIDIA than AMD, but for whatever reason, that it appears to be in reverse here. That is crazy. You guys leave a comment down below and let me know if you've actually noticed this before. I haven't. I mean, it's quite a noticeable difference too. Very crazy. Wow. Anyway, though, let's get back to the 4090, and what I've done here is I've set a 90 FPS cap, because that appears to be our low 90 FPS. So that allows us to get a very smooth frame time even in the city of Radeon. As a matter of fact, if you look at our 1% lows, they're really, really good. But yeah, guys, I guess to wrap up my conclusion, I couldn't believe that the Radeon 7900 XTX had a higher CPU overhead than the 4090, than NVIDIA. I'd never seen that before, so very unusual. I'm glad I actually took a look at this game, because I always like finding these, just these strange titles. Now, I wonder if this is a Crytek engine type of behavior. I'm not entirely sure. This is an older game too, so who knows what's going on. But yeah, guys, Kingdom Come Deliverance, it looks absolutely phenomenal on PC, and it is the best place to play the game, clearly, even though we get some frame time issues if we're CPU bound. Speaking of which, if you guys do have an Intel CPU, let me know how the game behaves. It would be cool. But yeah, what do you think? Share your thoughts down below. Are you going to play the sequel? I can't wait. Give the video a like if you did like it. I would really appreciate it. And consider subscribing for more content. We're going to be looking at the sequel as well. But anyway, I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.